But we begin tonight with what is becoming a clearer reality for the twice impeached, twice indicted former president, who up to now has been able to live a charmed life with little accountability, no matter what alleged crimes that he's committed. And now, at 77 years of age, for the first time, Donald Trump has found himself in a bind that he can't wriggle out of. A big part of that is because Trump has met his match, and his name is Jack Smith. It's been 7 months since Smith was appointed special counsel in the investigation into Trump's mishandling of classified documents. And while Trump has spent that time trying to win in the court of public opinion, spewing conspiracy theories and insults against the DOJ, Smith has been hard at work preparing a case to win in an actual courtroom based on facts and evidence. Trump and his legal team are getting their first look at some of that evidence as part of the discovery phase of the case. And it is likely causing some anxiety for the man who is trying to claim they're all out to get me as his legal strategy. The first batch of unclassified evidence shared by Smith includes information collected through subpoenas and grand jury testimony from witnesses who will take the stand for the government, according to a court filing yesterday. But what could be even more damning is the part of the filing that says interviews, plural, to describe the recordings of Trump made with his consent that the special counsel has obtained and is turning over. Now, we already know of one such bombshell recording made at Trump's Bedminster Golf Club, with Trump talking about a classified military document with people who were ghostwriting the memoir of his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. A recording where he admitted he couldn't show the document, which he seemed to be waving around to the writers who didn't have a security clearance because it was still classified, counter to Trump's numerous public claims that he declassified all the documents he took from the White House. And we don't know what the other recordings are, but the fact that they're being shared indicates that they're at least relevant to the case. And Trump is showing signs that he's growing more and more fearful of what's to come. The Atlantic's Tom Nichols points to Trump's disastrous Fox News interview this week as another sign that he is afraid, pointing to Trump's recent interview in which he seemed deeply uneasy in an environment where he should have felt at home, saying he looked genuinely off balance and was showcasing the trademark tells, including nervous and distracting sniffling and verbal hiccups, such as, "Are you ready?" that signal when he's tense and flustered. And you don't have to take it from me or Tom Nichols. Just look at Trump's page from his Twitter knockoff, where he spent this morning lashing out in extra long rants against the investigation, including in his signature all-cap style. For once, it does look like real accountability could be at hand for Trump. And frankly, he has every reason to be afraid. Joining me now is MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and former senior member of the Mueller probe. Always great to see you, Andrew. I want to read to you from the discovery court filing, this is the thing that's got folks intrigued. The government will disclose any payments, promises of immunity, leniency, preferential treatment, or other inducements made to prospective government witnesses within the scope of Giglio versus the United States or Napoli versus Illinois. Can you explain what that means in regular people terms?
Well, I'll try. You know, I am a lawyer and a law professor, so I'll give it my best shot. Under the Constitution, the government has to disclose evidence about its witnesses that could impeach them. So, for instance, let's just take Michael Cohen. If Michael Cohen is called as a witness in the Manhattan District Attorney's case, he's not going to be called in the Mar-a-Lago case, but in the Manhattan District Attorney's case, the Constitution requires that the government turn over to the defense all of his prior bad acts, everything that could be used to impeach him, most notably the fact that he has admitted that he committed perjury for Donald Trump, but nevertheless he committed perjury. So what that letter is saying is we are going to turn over everything that could be used to undermine the credibility of our witnesses. And that's part of what due process requires of the government. And every defendant, whether it's Donald Trump or somebody who's much less notable without those resources, is entitled to get from the government.
And let's just say Donald Trump, because he does have a pretend Twitter and he does use it quite extensively, were to, what does he call it, truth out something that he learns in this discovery phase. What would be the penalty? Because he has been told he's not supposed to do it. What if he did it anyway?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that the government has done, which I think is totally right, is they have turned over this discovery really early. I mean, this is exactly what you want our government to be doing, but it also allows them to say to the judge they want a quick trial because they've turned over the discovery so early to the defense. But that does mean that Donald Trump has a greater opportunity to try and tamper with witnesses, which is what your question goes to. Now, both in the Manhattan DA's case and in this case, the judges have issued orders saying what he can and cannot do with that evidence. But, an order is a piece of paper, and the defendant Trump, is already being accused of violating various laws, including a grand jury subpoena. So, that order remains to be seen whether it is going to work. Having said that, if he now tries to tamper with witnesses, that is such a serious offense. If you might remember, Paul Manafort, who I prosecuted in connection with the Mueller investigation, did just that. He tampered with 2 witnesses while out on bail. And you know what happened? He went to jail. That was somebody who was out on bail. And if you tamper with witnesses, if you commit that serious a crime while you're out on bail, that's an obvious consequence. So Donald Trump would obviously have to be caught doing this, but it can happen. And then the consequence is, he'll be running for the Republican nomination from inside of a jail cell.
Well, speaking of tampering with witnesses, he has a co-defendant, Walty Nauta, who's also facing very serious counts, including lying to the FBI. Let's just say he learned in the discovery what Walt Nauta has said in the course of the investigation. And then it'd be hard to prevent him from tampering with him, right? I mean, he practically lives at Mar-a-Lago. Is there a way that he could be sanctioned for that? And then part 2 of my question is, do you think that Jack Smith is still trying to work Walt Nauta to get him to flip at this stage?
So I think Walt Nauta would be the hardest person to be able to detect whether there is sort of continuing tampering with him. The judge did say that they can only speak about things unrelated to the case, but I mean, good luck monitoring that.
Right.
So that's a tough one. But I do think at this point, whatever collusion, with favorite word of Donald Trump, there is between Donald Trump and Nauta has happened. In other words, whatever cooked up story they have, that's sort of baked in. And that is presumably why Walt Nauta is now being charged for making false statements and obstructing. So I do think it'd be hard to catch that. Of course, the issue of Walt Nauta flipping, obviously the government tried to have that and tried to do that. Walt Nauta, as is his right, decided not to and to face the music. That's also his constitutional right. At this point, it's really clear that the government doesn't need him. So his window of opportunity to come in may be over.
Maybe closed.
Exactly. And at this point, he decided, as we used to say, which side of the V he wants to be on in the United States versus the defendant. He was given an opportunity to be on the United States side. He has decided, as is his right, to be on the other side. You never know if it's ultimately too late, but I can assure you, knowing Jack Smith, that if he comes in, he's going to have to plead guilty to what he did.